Diamonds may be a gal's best friend, but diamond quilting designs are a machine quilter's dream. Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters from QuiltingIsMyTherapy.com, and welcome to the second video in the Dot to Dot Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along video series. Throughout these 6 videos, I'm showing you how fun and easy it is to quilt these dot to dot designs on your quilts. Now, in the last video, we learned the 2 basic shapes that make up all the dot to dot quilting designs, the V and the wedge. And we learned those in the diamond design and the starburst design. If you haven't seen that video, be sure to go back and check it out, because in this video, we're gonna use that diamond design to jump off and create some interesting and cool variations. I'll demonstrate how to quilt them on a sewing machine and a long arm, and share practical tips on where to actually use them on your quilts. When it comes to creating design variations, there are so many ways that you can do this. It was really hard to narrow it down for this video. So before we get started, I just wanna say that I don't want these design variations to be overwhelming. Seeing all the different designs might make you think, oh my gosh, I have to learn them all, and that's not the case. Instead, think of it as my persuasive argument to make you love the dot to dot quilting technique as much as I do. You can pick and choose which variations that you want to learn, or you can create your own. And before we get started, don't forget I've put together a free downloadable PDF with quilting diagrams for each of the variations we're going to learn in this video. Now, if you need a little bit more help, more tips, you can check out the expanded resource PDF with even more steps, even more quilting diagrams, and even more tips. To find the information out about both of those, just click the link in the description box below or scan the QR code. So, let's get to it. If you recall from the earlier video, the diamond design is one that touches 2 of the corners of a block or area and doesn't touch the other 2. Now, what we're going to do is take that same basic concept and create some really cool variations off of it. And the first and easiest way to switch up the diamond design is to combine it with a different free motion filler design. So let's look at the shape that I'm going to fill in. Now, this particular block is not your normal square, but I'm still going to pick 2 of the corners to touch, and 2 of the corners I'm going to place a dot about 1 inch or so inside of it. Of course, I could just mark my reference dots, which is what I'm going to do, or if you felt more comfortable, you could mark out the whole design. So starting from the corner that the line is touching, I'm going to quilt a line to that next dot, and then on to the opposite corner. So this line is a little bit longer than the previous. I'm using a ruler to help me out with that, but you could freehand it as well. And I'm going to repeat on the other side, quilting down to that dot that's just inside the next corner and back onto my starting point. I always put my dot to dot echoing in first and then my filler. Now at this point you have a choice. If I was dealing with a bigger block, I could add more echo lines on the inside, but instead I'm going to put a different design in between those lines. I love the curvy look of the filler next to the straight lines. It just gives it a pop of texture and really helps that block shine. And when it comes to the design you put in that area, it's totally up to you. I like wishbones, back and forth lines, even a meander like a swirl. Really, anything you feel comfortable can go in that area. I think I'll do wishbones just because that's one of my favorites, but truly it could be any design. The reason I love putting that filler in the center of that design is it kind of breaks up the monotony of the quilting. I tend to get pretty bored doing the same thing over and over again, so throwing in a different design just keeps me a little bit more engaged. But also that texture in the center is going to kind of smash down that area and let the outer edge of it really shine. And what I love is that you end up opposite from where you started, so if you were working on multiple blocks, it would be easy to continue on. In this example, I quilted my lines towards the outside and filled on the inside of it. If you want a slightly different look or a little bit more of a challenge, you could quilt those diamond designs so that they center on the block and put the filler around the outside. You can also experiment with different fillers in different sections or use the same one over the whole thing. It's just a fun way to add a pop of texture and draw attention to that block. Up to this point, we've been seeing the diamond design in blocks with 4 sides, but I love, love, love using this design in triangles. It's the perfect design to emphasize the shape of the triangle while quickly and easily quilting it. Basically, I'm just looking at that triangle as half a square. I'm picking 2 of my points to touch and the other one not touching. And just like we've seen, I start from one side, quilt to that point, and on back. And depending on the size of the triangle, I can add more or less lines to really get the density of the quilting that I'm wanting to get. If you make lots of sampler quilts, such as our Build a Quilt Block of the Month program, you're gonna love this design because it works in all different areas and shapes, especially those triangles. So let's see some other quilted examples. So perfect example of using that dot to dot design in the triangles. I love how it draws attention to the corners, it enhances that shape and looks really pretty. But you can also use it around your blocks. Once you start looking for those areas to fill in, you'll be surprised how many times they show up. So right here in between my triangles, I can treat that kind of as a block or an area and quilt my dot to dot design within there. So look for those dots in the blocks and even between the block. Now, 90% of the time I quilt the diamond design like this in my flying geese because I like how it stretches it out, kind of shows that shape. But for a fun, wonkier, more whimsical effect, you can change those points that touch. So in this little quilted example, we can see again that diamond design in the triangles. But in this block up here, I chose to make these points touch and this point not touch. It just gives it a wonky, slightly different look, and I especially love this for improvisationally pieced blocks or maybe children's quilts or things where you don't mind something a little bit more fun. So let's take this idea of putting the diamond design in triangles and see what it looks like on the zigzag design. This next design variation takes the diamond design and gives it a little twist by breaking larger blocks into two smaller triangles. Changing the direction of the lines creates a cool zigzag effect on your blocks. Now before we get started, I just want to point out that you can go about quilting this design in a number of different ways. So as you're working through it, you might find that you follow a different set of steps, and that's totally fine. I also like to use the stitching in the ditch to move around the block and quilt this design. Stitching in the ditch just means I'm quilting along a seam. If the idea of that makes you just a little bit nervous, don't worry, you can tie off and start a new line of quilting at the next spot. I'm going to be putting the zigzag design in this diamond shape, and I'm going to start from one of the corners. I'm going to quilt directly across to the other side. This line is breaking this block up into two pieces so I can fill in those individual parts with the diamond design. From this point, I'm going to stitch along the seams and return to my starting point. Now I'm going to quilt that diamond design within this defined space by quilting a line that goes out and ending about a ½ inch or so away from the other corner, on to the next corner, and I'm going to echo my way back. The important thing here is I want to return back at my starting point. So far, so good. I have half my design quilted. I just need to do the same on the other side. But to get that cool zigzag effect, I want to quilt my diamond design in the opposite direction on the other side. So I'm going to travel on the edge to get to that point and then fill in that space. Now that I have that space defined, I'm going to quilt the diamond design in that other side. Quilting that line that goes out to the opposite corner and echoing my way back. And once I'm finished, I have that beautiful zigzag design, and I've stitched along all the seams around the outside of the block. And just like all the other designs that we're going to see throughout this video series, for larger blocks I can add more lines, and for smaller blocks I can add less. And if I'm quilting this design in multiple blocks, the fact that I end across from where I started means I can go right into that next block and continue on without breaking thread. While this design might not be mind-blowing all by itself, it really shines when used in consecutive blocks because it creates a really cool secondary pattern. For instance, in these two diamond shapes, which I've quilted that zigzag shape so that it comes together and alternates direction, the design really kind of draws those two blocks together, and it can create a stunning secondary pattern. This zigzag design is the perfect example that a quilting design doesn't have to be difficult to be impactful. Now, let's see how we can use that diamond design in bigger blocks. If once is good, then twice is extra nice. For this next variation, we're going to quilt two diamonds that overlap each other to create a design that's really going to highlight the center of the block. So just like we've seen before, I'm going to quilt that diamond design in the block. Once that's finished, I'm going to move to the next corner and quilt another diamond design that touches the opposite corners. We saw in the last variation that I like to use traveling to get to that next area, but of course you can tie off and start a new line of quilting if you want. So for the first diamond, these points touch the corners, but on this one, these two will touch the corners. So I'm going to quickly use my water-soluble pen and mark out those registration dots and quilt my other diamond design. Don't stress out too much about making these diamonds perfectly symmetrical, because for this design, really, the unquilted area in the center is what's going to pop out. I especially love using this design in blocks that have a focal print in the center, since those diamonds kind of wrap around the outside and leave that beautiful center unquilted. And to tell the truth, this is actually a great design if you're struggling with quilting those straight lines. Since we're throwing more lines on top of it, any one individual line isn't going to stand out. The double diamonds might take twice the work, but the result is so worth the effort. The diamond design can work in blocks of all sizes, but using it in larger blocks can mean longer lines, which can be a little bit tricky. In this next variation, we're going to take those bigger areas, break them into smaller pieces, and quilt that diamond design so that it rotates around the center. The result is a design that really brings your eye to the center of the block while making those lines shorter and easier to quilt. Using my handy Designs with Lines stencil, I'm going to divide that block into 4 smaller squares. I'm basically going to quilt the diamond design in each corner, starting from the center, quilting up to that dot, on out to the corner, just like we've seen, and back to the starting point. since this design always brings you back to where you started, I can easily go into the next square and work my way around that way. Of course, you don't have to mark out every line, you can just have those reference lines, but the main idea is I'm gonna start in the center, work my way around that block, ending back where I started, and it's gonna create a beautiful motif that's really gonna bring your eye to the center. Now let's take this over to the long arm and see what it looks like to actually quilt the design. And then start quilting my diamond design in each of the 4 blocks. Now when it comes to quilting this design, either on a long arm or a sewing machine, there are a couple things you need to consider. First of all, we're gonna have a lot of lines coming to the center of that block. So I'm definitely gonna make sure it's one of my favorite blocks or an area of the quilt I wanna highlight. I'm also going to use a thread color that matches the background fabric. All those lines coming together can get really distracting if I'm using contrasting thread. Now in this video, I'm using contrasting thread so that you can see what I'm doing. But just know that if you're working on your quilts, if you use a thread color that blends in, you'll just get that nice, beautiful texture, a little bit of interest in the center without being like, whoa, there it is. And when you're done, you have a beautiful design that really takes that bigger block and breaks it up and makes it more manageable, while drawing your eye to the center. The last variation that we're going to learn in this video has a few more steps to it, and it might take a little bit longer to wrap your mind around, but once you get the hang of it, it goes together nice and quickly. Let me mark it out and kind of give you an idea of what we're working with here. Looking at my block area, I'm going to quilt that diamond design where 2 of the points touch the corners and 2 of them are just inside. Now once I have that line done, on the next section I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm going to change the points that are touching. So instead of touching these 2 points, I'm going to touch these points and go about 1 inch or so inside the other ones. Something like this. And depending on the size of the block or how crazy I want to get the quilting, I can keep going, quilting that diamond design, changing the dots that touch each time. So if I wanted to add another ring in here, I can say, all right, these corners are going to touch and these won't, and I'll quilt that design. I love how it adds interest. It really draws your eye to the center of the block, but you probably can tell there's a little problem with this. If I quilt it out the way I drew it, I'm gonna have to start a new line of quilting for each successive design, and I don't wanna do that. So instead, what I'm gonna do is quilt it in one continuous movement. And the thing to remember though is I'm never gonna finish one of the designs until I'm all done. So let me show you how that might look a little different. Going back to our block and marking out that design, I'm gonna start the same way, quilting that diamond design so that 2 of the corners touch and 2 of them don't. However, I'm not going to do all 4 sides, I'm only going to do 3 sides of it. Now normally I would continue on and finish it up, but I'm not. I'm going to pause, stop right there, and do my next ring. Basically, I'm imagining that I have a quilted line there, but it's not there yet. Now the next section, I'm going to make 2 of the points touch, 2 of them not touch, and they're going to be alternating. So from this point, I can go right into my next design. But again, not finishing that out until I'm ready to be done. And since I have a little bit more room, I might add another one inside. So pausing on that one, going into the center, changing the points that touch. So going from here, here, here. Now, let's be honest, I practiced this right before I started filming, so I kind of know how it goes together. In the beginning, just take your time and work through the steps. It's definitely worth getting the hang of. Now, once I've decided, okay, enough is enough, I can go ahead and start closing up all of those diamond designs. So from here, I'm going to finish that center diamond, going back to touch, and now I'm on my 2nd row, so I'll finish that one out, and then on out to here. What I love about it is I can start at one point, quilt the whole design, and come right back to where I started so I can move on to the next one. Now, depending on your personality, you might have no problem quilting it just how I've shown it. However, if you're like, no, I don't want to do that, I want to quilt each successive diamond and not have to worry about trying to connect them all in the end, then do it that way. What I love about this technique and machine quilting in general is you can change the orientation, you can change how you handle these things to make them fit your preferences. Now, as I'm sure you can guess, the most difficult part about quilting this design is keeping track of where you're going and where you've been. As you're quilting along, whether it's on your long arm or your sewing machine, if you get lost, just stop, take a moment and use your fingers to trace out the next couple steps. It's a lot easier to change your mind than to rip out quilting that's going somewhere you don't want it. Even though I'm going to quilt the design in this diamond-shaped block, the steps are still the same. I'm going to start by quilting the first 3 lines of the diamond design, going from one corner to inside the next corner and onto the opposite corner. Then continuing down to inside the next corner. Normally I would continue quilting, but instead I'm going to stop right here. And even though I'm not quilting that line right now, I can mark it out so I can see where it's going to go. Now I'm going to start my 2nd diamond so that these 2 corners touch and these 2 don't. Repeating the steps, stopping at that 3rd line. Now if I wanted, I could repeat to add more diamonds, but when I decide that I'm done, I'm going to finish up the diamonds by going from point to point. I just love being able to quilt the design in one continuous line without having to stop. And then once you're done, you have that really cool design that kind of changes direction, adds an intricate look. And if you want bonus points, you can add some quilting in the middle of this unquilted area. Now whether you want to keep it nice and simple or go crazy, there is a diamond design variation that's perfect for you. Now it's your turn. If you're quilting along with me, on the panel I designed exclusively for this challenge, fill in the areas highlighted in red with the diamond design variations of your choice. You can use each of the ones I've shown you, you can pick and choose your favorites, or you can come up with your own. And I'll be back next week with another video where we'll take that starburst design we learned in video 1 and create some fun variations with it. Until then everybody, happy quilting!